Some women don't chase. And yet they're never forgotten. Because they move differently through the landscape of a man's mind. They arrive like a quiet storm, not with noise, but with a pressure in the air that unsettles him. At first, he calls it beauty. Later, he realizes it's something else entirely. Something ancient. Something he can't name without trembling. The man who falls for her does not understand that he is stepping into an arena, not a garden. He sees only the soft invitation of her eyes, the curve of her mouth that carries 1,000 unspoken stories, the way she listens without rushing to fill the silence. He doesn't see the mirror she holds, not the one that flatters, but the one that reflects. And here is the part no one warns you about. A man's love, when it comes from his unconscious shadow, does not rise like the sun. It seeps like ink. At first, his love feels like warmth in the chest, like finding a place to rest after years of wandering. But it is not truly love, not yet. It is recognition. Recognition of an image buried in him long before he ever knew her. Carl Jung called it the anima, the inner feminine, the part of himself he has disowned and longed for in equal measure. And when a man's anima is wounded, his love becomes a dangerous thing. He will see in her the embodiment of what he has lost. Not her as she is, breathing, flawed, sovereign, but her as an archetype. She is not a woman to him yet, she is a projection. A sacred idol built from the fragments of his own unlived life. And when a man loves his own projection, the woman becomes a hostage to it. At first, she feels worshipped. His gaze is so focused it feels like sunlight. His words are so certain they seem carved in stone. He will say she is different from all the rest. He will say she is the answer to his restlessness. And part of her wants to believe it, because every woman carries her own shadow, the secret wish to be seen as irreplaceable. But the man whose love springs from shadow does not see her soul. He sees the reflection of his own longing. And the moment she fails to mirror back his ideal, the warmth in his chest curdles. The first turning point comes quietly. Perhaps she disagrees with him in a way that exposes his uncertainty. Perhaps she withdraws for a day to tend to her own storms. Perhaps she simply exists in her own fullness, no longer shaped by the contours of his desire. And in that moment, he feels the fracture, the gap between the woman she is and the woman in his mind. If he has never done his shadow work, the fracture feels like betrayal. He will not call it that. He will call it confusion, or disappointment, or something feels off. But beneath the surface, an old wound begins to bleed. The boy inside him, the one who loved and lost before he understood love, stirs awake. And the boy does not know how to grieve without clinging. His love now shifts into possession. He begins to test her devotion, not with open cruelty, but with small withdrawals. A text left unanswered. A tenderness withheld. A subtle shift in tone that says, "Prove to me you're still mine." She feels the air change. At first, she thinks she has done something wrong. Women are conditioned from centuries of survival to read the smallest shifts in a man's weather, to trace the fault back to themselves. She tries to close the gap. She explains more, smiles more, reaches for him in the ways he once reached for her. And for a moment, he softens again, enough to make her believe the storm has passed. But his love is no longer about connection. It is about control. This is the second turning point, the place where many women lose themselves without realizing it. Because control, when wrapped in the language of love, does not feel like a cage. It feels like gravity. He wants to know where she is, not because he doubts her, but because he cares. He questions her choices, not to limit her, but to protect her. He critiques her dreams, not to belittle them, but because he doesn't want to see her hurt. It is here that trauma psychology and archetypal truth intertwine like smoke. The woman who has not yet individuated, who has not yet met her own shadow, will mistake control for security. She will think his boundaries are strength. She will think his jealousy is passion. She will think his unpredictability is depth. And so she stays. She stays because she remembers the man from the beginning, the one who saw her like no one else. She does not realize that the man she loves is not gone, he was never real. He was an image crafted from projection, and projections are always unsustainable. The third turning point is the moment she sees herself in his eyes and realizes she is not there. She is thinner in his vision, quieter, less certain. Her edges are blurred to fit the frame of his desire. The woman she is, the one who laughs too loud, who says no when she means it, who leaves when she is not valued, has been replaced by a softer, smaller echo. And she understands, his love was never for her. In Jung's language, this is the moment the projection begins to dissolve. But dissolution is not liberation, not yet. Because now comes the grief. The grief of knowing that the man she wanted to be her home is actually a mirror. The grief of realizing that she has been trying to live inside someone else's dream. The grief of admitting that the love she thought would nourish her has been quietly consuming her. This is where Stoic philosophy whispers its cold wisdom: control what you can, release what you cannot. And the only thing she can control now is herself. So she begins the work of individuation, the slow, unglamorous process of meeting her own shadow. She asks herself why she stayed when the air turned heavy. Why she kept offering proof of her worth to a man who had already decided what she was worth. Why she mistook longing for love. She begins to see the patterns, not just his, but hers. The places where her hunger to be chosen made her blind. The ways her own wounds reached for his. And in seeing, she begins to reclaim. She reclaims the nights she spent explaining herself into exhaustion. She reclaims the laughter she learned to swallow. She reclaims the dreams she put on hold because they didn't fit the life he imagined for her. And slowly, the grip of his shadow loosens. When he notices the change, he will call it distance. He will say she's colder, harder, not like she used to be. He will try to pull her back into the dance, sometimes with sweetness, sometimes with anger. Because a man whose love comes from shadow does not want a partner, he wants a reflection. But the woman who has met her own shadow cannot be a mirror anymore. She has learned that true love is not possession. True love does not shrink you to fit its frame. True love does not confuse silence with peace, or control with care. And so one day, without announcement, she leaves. She does not leave in rage. She does not leave to make him regret. She leaves because the place she built for herself inside his mind was never her home. And as she walks away, she understands the truth no one told her. The dark side of a man's love is not always in what he does to you. Sometimes it is in what you let yourself become for him. And the woman who walks away in silence isn't weak, she simply sees more. But endings are never clean in the realm of the unconscious. The man whose love she leaves behind does not watch her go with quiet resignation. No, he feels it as a wound, not because she was his, but because she carried a piece of him he had not yet claimed for himself. And when a man's anima walks away, the emptiness she leaves is not just hers, it is the echo of every unhealed loss he's ever known. He may try to follow. Not physically, perhaps, but in thought, in presence. He might reappear in the silent corners of her life, a message at midnight, a song sent by accident, a question through mutual friends. At first, she might mistake these gestures for signs of lingering love. But when she has done enough shadow work, she recognizes them for what they are, the psyche's desperate attempt to reclaim a projection it cannot sustain alone. It is here that the dance between anima and animus becomes fully visible. In Jungian terms, the woman he loved was not her alone. She was the vessel for his inner feminine, the softer, intuitive, emotionally attuned part of him that he had buried. In loving her, he was trying to love himself. In losing her, he is losing the bridge to that hidden part of his soul. But if he has not yet begun his own individuation, he will not step into the river of his own shadow. Instead, he will seek another vessel. And this is the part no one warns you about, for the man who has not faced himself. Love is not transformation, it is repetition. He will repeat the pattern with another woman, perhaps with slightly different colors and shapes, but always with the same underlying structure. His shadow will keep searching for its mirror until he turns to face it. And for the woman who has walked away, this realization becomes its own kind of liberation. Because she begins to see that it was never about her not being enough. It was about him not yet being whole. In the quiet after the leaving, she begins to notice things she had forgotten belonged to her. The pace of her own thoughts without someone else's moods clouding the air. The sound of her laughter, not the polite, measured laugh of someone performing harmony, but the raw, uncontained sound that bursts from somewhere deep. She begins to dress for the way fabric feels against her skin, not for the way it will be read by someone else's eyes. She realizes, slowly, that in loving him, she had handed over parts of herself in exchange for the illusion of safety. And now, in loving herself, she is learning to keep them. There is a difference between leaving and being gone. Leaving is physical, the closing of a door, the absence of a body. Being gone is psychic, the untangling of your spirit from theirs, the breaking of the invisible threads that once pulled you back without your consent. And psychic departure is the hardest. Because his voice still lives in her memory. The way he looked at her still drifts through her mind on certain nights. The warmth of his hand in hers still lingers as a ghost on her skin. These are the imprints of attachment, the nervous system's way of holding on to what felt like home, even when home was built on unstable ground. But here, trauma psychology and feminine power intersect. She learns that attachment is not love, it is the nervous system's response to familiarity. And familiarity can be dangerous when it comes from the repetition of pain. So she teaches herself new patterns. She allows herself to sit in silence without reaching for the phone. She chooses friendships that do not require her to shrink. She moves through her days asking, "What do I need right now?" instead of, "What would make him stay?" And slowly, her nervous system learns to find safety in her own presence. In the mythology of the psyche, this is the return of the heroine, the stage in which she carries the fire she had once sought in others back into her own hands. She is not hardened, she is clarified. For the man she left, this is the most dangerous transformation. Because now, she is no longer a mirror. She is a light. And a man lost in his shadow cannot look directly at the light without confronting what it reveals. Sometimes he will attempt to return, not because he has changed, but because her distance has reignited the longing that began their story. He will remember the way she made him feel, not realizing that it was not her job to sustain that feeling. He may arrive with promises, with confessions, with tears that are half grief and half fear of his own emptiness. The unhealed man does not want to face his own depths, he wants her to climb back in and fill them. But she has walked too far into her own soul to do that again. This is where Stoic philosophy becomes more than an idea, it becomes a way of standing. She understands now that her value does not depend on whether he sees it. She understands that peace is not given, it is cultivated. She understands that love, in its truest form, cannot survive in the shadow, it must live in the open air of two whole beings meeting each other without masks. And so, when he reaches out again, she does not rage. She does not plead. She does not explain. She simply stands in the clarity of who she has become. In Jungian language, she has integrated part of her animus, the inner masculine energy that protects, directs, and holds boundaries. She no longer needs him to be her container, because she has built her own. The man who sees this transformation and has begun his own individuation will respect it. He will not try to pull her back into the old dance. He will face his own shadow and learn that love is not about finding someone to complete you. It is about walking beside someone who is already complete. But the man who has not begun this work will call her cold. He will say she has changed. And he will be right, just not in the way he means. Because change is not always soft. Sometimes it is the burning away of what once felt essential. Sometimes it is the dismantling of the altar you built to someone else's idea of love. Sometimes it is the refusal to play a role you never auditioned for. She walks now with a quiet that is not emptiness, but fullness. A quiet that does not come from suppression, but from self-possession. The kind of quiet that makes people wonder what she knows. And what she knows is this: The dark side of a man's love is not a monster in the corner. It is a subtle current beneath the surface, pulling you away from yourself one concession at a time. It is the way passion can disguise possession, how protection can hide control, how longing can feel like depth. It is the way his eyes can look like salvation when they are really just a reflection of your own unclaimed light. And when you see it, truly see it, you cannot unsee it. That is why she does not look back. Not because she has hardened, but because she has softened toward herself. Because she has learned that her worth is not in being unforgettable to him, it is in never forgetting herself again. The woman who walks away in silence isn't weak, she simply sees more. Time passes differently after she leaves him. For her, it is slow at first, the kind of time that drips, not flows. For him, it is jagged, punctured by sudden surges of longing, regret, and denial. In Jung's language, he is caught in the enantiodromia, the reversal of extremes. Where once his love was consuming, now his absence becomes obsession. He remembers fragments, her hair falling across her shoulder in morning light, the tilt of her head when she listened as though each word had weight, the way she didn't try to fill every silence. But his memory is selective. It edits out the moments she turned away, the quiet recall in her body when his tone shifted, the way her laughter dimmed over time. He remembers the ideal, not the truth. And here lies another unspoken danger in the dark side of a man's love: nostalgia is rarely honest. The human psyche will repaint the past to protect the ego. In trauma psychology, this is survival. The mind softens the sharp edges of memory so the pain does not cut too deep. But when nostalgia hides the truth, it creates a longing for something that never truly existed. He is not trying to return to her. He is trying to return to the man he believed he was when she loved him. Meanwhile, she is navigating her own labyrinth. Liberation is not linear. Some days she feels light, like she has stepped out of a heavy garment she did not know she was wearing. Other days she feels the pull, the muscle memory of his voice, the instinct to share a victory with him, the phantom ache of intimacy. These are the days that test her. Because the shadow does not vanish when you walk away. It follows, whispering old scripts into your ear. Maybe you were too harsh. Maybe you misunderstood. Maybe you could try again. And if a woman has not yet fully integrated her own shadow, these whispers sound like reason. But individuation demands vigilance. She begins to notice how her body responds when she remembers him. A tightening in the chest. A quickening of breath. A subtle forward tilt, as if part of her still wants to move toward him. And she asks herself, is this love, or is this the nervous system craving the familiar? The answer is rarely romantic. Familiarity feels safe even when it's destructive, because the psyche prefers known pain to unknown uncertainty. This is why so many return to the very love that harmed them, not because it has healed, but because it feels like home. Here, she chooses a different path. She sits with the ache instead of silencing it. She lets the longing rise without rushing to meet it. She learns to tell the difference between desire and need. And in doing so, she begins to unhook her nervous system from his. It is in this space that the archetype of the sovereign woman emerges. She is no longer the maiden, defined by the gaze of the lover. She is not yet the crone, carrying the wisdom of decades. She is in the liminal stage, the queen who builds her own throne, not to be admired, but to rest upon without fear of it being pulled from beneath her. The man, sensing her detachment, may shift his approach. This is the fourth turning point, the return disguised as change. He comes back with language she longed to hear before, admissions of fault, acknowledgments of the ways he took her for granted, declarations that he has realized what matters. His eyes carry that same intensity that once disarmed her. And for a moment, she feels the ground shake beneath her. Because part of her still wants to believe him. Not because she cannot survive without him, but because the psyche loves the idea of closure in the form of transformation. It is a softer ending if he has truly changed. But this is where her shadow work protects her. She knows that words are not evidence of growth, patterns are. And patterns cannot shift without the deep excavation of one's own unconscious. Has he faced his shadow? Has he met the boy inside who first learned to love through control, or absence, or projection? Has he dismantled the ideal he placed upon her and seen her as she truly is? If the answer is no, then his return is not rebirth, it is relapse. And so, she does what most cannot, she listens without leaning forward. She allows his words to pass through her without anchoring in her chest. She sees the longing in his eyes and does not mistake it for love. She understands now that longing is often about the self, not the other. This refusal confuses him. In the old dance, her softness would have opened the door. But she has learned that softness without discernment is not compassion, it is surrender. She will not surrender to the shadow again. The more she holds her ground, the more he oscillates between tenderness and frustration. This oscillation is his shadow's last attempt to reclaim its mirror. If affection will not work, perhaps guilt will. He might remind her of their history, of the moments no one else will understand, of the ways he was always there. But she knows the truth: being present in body is not the same as being present in soul. Her individuation is nearly complete now. She has integrated enough of her animus to hold the line. She has seen enough of her own shadow to recognize when it reaches for the familiar pain. She has learned that her worth is not in being the one who stays, but in being the one who chooses with clarity. And here, the most profound shift occurs: she no longer sees him as the villain. This is the final liberation. Not forgiveness in the way the world romanticizes it, but the understanding that he was never capable of giving what he had not yet found in himself. His love was the best his shadow could offer. And she no longer needs to change that, because she is no longer waiting for it. When she walks away this time, it is not an escape. It is an arrival, into herself, into the quiet strength she has built, into the life she no longer apologizes for. She does not need him to see her worth. She sees it so clearly it no longer requires witness. And somewhere, in the deep, unlit chambers of his own psyche, he feels the absence. Not the absence of her body, but the absence of his reflection in her. Without her, the mirror is gone, and he is left with only himself. That is where his real work will begin, if he is willing. But whether he does or not is no longer her concern. She has walked into a different kind of love now, one that begins and ends with her own soul. In dreams he still finds her. Not as she was in the beginning, and not as she became at the end, but in strange, impossible places where memory and myth meet. Sometimes she stands in a field of white poppies that sway without wind, their petals whispering secrets he can't quite hear. Sometimes she walks through a hall of mirrors, but each reflection shows a different version of her: the laughing maiden, the guarded queen, the wild wanderer who will not be claimed. In every dream, he reaches for her. In every dream, she slips away. The psyche often delivers its truths in images before it delivers them in words. Carl Jung knew that dreams are the messengers of the unconscious, bringing symbols up from the depths like divers carrying relics from a sunken city. These dreams are not accidents. They are his shadow calling for him, showing him the woman not as she is, but as the archetype she embodied. And in these dreamscapes, the anima speaks. Not with the sweetness of his waking memories, but with the clarity of an ancient voice. She tells him, "I am not yours. I am the bridge to yourself. You chased me because you would not walk to your own depths alone." He wakes with her words in his bones, though he will not always admit them. For her, the dreams are different. She sees him less and less, and when he does appear, he is not the towering figure he once was. Sometimes, he is a boy sitting at the edge of a dried-up fountain, staring at his empty hands. Sometimes, he is a shadow on the other side of a river she cannot cross. In one dream, he stands behind a glass wall, his mouth moving, but no sound comes out. She wakes knowing what the dreams are telling her: the cord between them is no longer alive. In myth, this stage is the descent to the underworld, the point in the heroine's journey where she must face the deepest parts of her psyche without the distraction of another's gaze. This is where Persephone stops being the maiden stolen away and begins to rule as queen of the dead. This is where Inanna strips herself of every jewel, every garment, every symbol of status before she can descend to face her sister, Ereshkigal. And this is where the sovereign woman understands that love cannot be her crown unless it sits upon the head she has forged in fire. Her fire now is not loud. It is the steady, controlled burn of someone who no longer fears emptiness. She knows that love will come again, perhaps with another man, perhaps not, but when it does, it will not arrive through projection. It will come in the meeting of two whole beings, both having faced their shadows and lived to tell the tale. He, meanwhile, wanders his own inner corridors. Sometimes he thinks of calling her, of telling her he has changed, but the thought curdles in his throat. Because somewhere, he knows she will not return. And somewhere deeper still, he knows it is not her he is missing, but himself, the self he glimpsed only in her presence. This is the tragedy of the unintegrated man. The woman he loses is always a messenger from his own soul, and he does not see it until she is gone. And this is the quiet triumph of the individuated woman. She can love without losing herself, and she can leave without losing love. In the end, their story is not a cautionary tale about avoiding men. It is a warning about avoiding yourself. Because until you meet your own shadow, every love will carry the risk of possession, either theirs over you, or yours over them. And so she walks, not away from love, but toward a love that begins in the mirror she now holds steady, the one that shows her not as anyone else's dream, but as she truly is. The night she finally knows she is free, the air is still. She stands by her window, watching the city breathe below, and she feels no pull toward his memory. Not because she has erased him, but because she has integrated the part of herself that once needed him to feel whole. And somewhere, in the deepest recesses of the psychic landscape, the anima returns to him, not as her face, but as his own. This is the liberation no one warns you about. When you see the dark side of a man's love for what it is, you are not left in the dark. You are left holding the torch that lights your own way. The woman who walks away in silence isn't weak, she simply sees more.